America is an enchanted place. And by enchanted, I mean we see a lot of different kinds of magical beliefs in the United States. When I started doing research on conspiracy theories in 2006, I had some extra room on a survey, and I had run into some conspiracy theorists, and I was wondering how common was this sort of sentiment in the United States. And I threw these questions on kind of as an afterthought, and got back some huge numbers, which then I've subsequently done in some other surveys. And we find that Americans really like conspiracy theories. If you ask them about different types of conspiracy theories, you typically have very high percentages of agreement with any variety of conspiracy theories across the ideological spectrum. Americans also are a very supernaturally oriented people. Very high percentages believe in angels, believe in Satan, believe in heaven. A lot have paranormal beliefs, such as in UFOs, ESP, and in ghosts. We see very large percentages agreeing in these phenomena. Americans are not really high on science. As you can sort of see, under 50% actually believe in Darwinian evolution. Large percentages think vaccines cause autism. Roughly 40% thinks dinosaurs and humans coexisted. Magical thinking has two key elements to it. The first is that magical thinking assigns causal attributions to phenomena that cannot be directly observed or verified. So when we're talking about magical thinking, and this is what links conspiracy theories with supernatural thinking, with paranormal thinking, we're really talking about there's some force out there that's causing something to happen that we cannot directly observe that causation going on. Now, there's a lot of science, of course, and scientific theories that postulate invisible or unverifiable forces that are causing things. We can think about like dark matter or dark energy. I think the difference between magical thinking is that magical thinking also must contradict some other prevalent belief about the same phenomena that is subject to some sort of observation and verification. So magical beliefs are not simply about just finding invisible forces, but it's an explanation that somehow or another is transgressive or oppositional to a scientific one. And that's important because if we think about other cultures, for example, that might have certain supernatural entities that they think are causing droughts or natural phenomena, but if they, we might say, ooh, that's magical thinking, but if they don't have an alternative belief system to compete with that, that might just simply be their science. We as human beings face a real dilemma, which is a lot of times we face fear from our own uncertainty, and particularly our ability to imagine our own mortality. We are unique among species in our ability to sort of project into the future and really imagine some time where we may not exist. And so we can have different kinds of uncertainty, and I think I want to differentiate. I think different kinds of uncertainty generate different kinds of magical thinking. There's the acute uncertainty of a circumstance. So for example, in battle, we don't know if a shell is going to come and hit us versus our neighbor, deep sea fishing, gambling, professional sports. These are all contexts where you see high amounts of superstitious behavior, but they're superstitious behaviors that tend to be constrained to those particular circumstances. A baseball player might wear his lucky hat when he's at the bat, but he doesn't wear his lucky hat, for example, when he goes to the supermarket or when he prays to God. Similarly, then there's the chronic uncertainty, and there's chronic uncertainty that I said it comes from our own realization of mortality. And these things dealing with death, mortality, disease, even love. And it's with these circumstances that we tend to have more supernatural or magical belief systems. These are more overarching systems that try to explain all phenomenon relative to some magical element. And they tend to be more grossly encompassing, and they have different levels of constraint. As I'm going through this, imagine you're one of our survey respondents, and what we basically do is we're going to give you a set of unusual questions. Can you please give us your gut response to these questions and just tell us what's the one that you immediately comes to mind? We ask people to sort of answer these questions as quickly as they can. And they go as follows. Would you rather, A, stab a photograph of your family, or B, stick your hand in a bowl of slimy worms, and sometimes we say cockroaches? Stab, okay. Yeah. We don't give the neither option. We yell, next, would you rather yell, I hope I die tomorrow out loud 5 times, or ride in a speeding car without a seatbelt? Yeah. Okay. Would you rather sleep in laundered pajamas once worn by Charles Manson, or put a nickel in your mouth that you found on the ground? Pajamas. we've asked these sets of questions now in 5 different surveys, and the consistency of the responses is remarkable. So basically, we sort of see that 2/3 of people would rather stick their hands in a bowl of slimy worms instead of a photograph of their family. If you move it to cockroaches, it gets more 50-50. So we had to play with these because you had to figure out, okay, we wanted to get a good balance here in terms of these, the symbolic value. And so you see that cockroaches are worth that much more. A few more would probably ride without a seatbelt than be willing to yell, "I hope I die tomorrow." Once again, about 2/3 would rather put a nickel in their mouth that they found on the ground than sleep in lawn or pajamas, by Charles Manson. What we have on the low end of the scale are tangible thinkers. So these are people who basically avoid the tangible costs, the putting the nickel in their mouth, sticking their hand in the bowl of cockroaches. These are sort of the demonstrable, tangible costs. And they'll accept a symbolic cost and they'll take the tangible costs consistently. We see about half the sample really is in between and switches depending on the particular items, moving back and forth. Some items will take tangible costs and some will take symbolic costs. And at the high end of the scale are people who always avoid the symbolic costs and will absorb a tangible cost relative to, or prefer a tangible cost to the symbolic cost. We can go through and start looking at some different supernatural and paranormal beliefs, and we see these two change dramatically across this scale. For example, the percent agreeing with the idea that their life has a specific purpose tends to dramatically increase. I think people who are tangible thinkers, fewer than 40% actually would agree with this particular statement, as opposed to symbolic thinkers, where we see over 70% think that their life has a particular purpose. Similarly, if you look at supernatural beliefs, things like heaven, angels, Satan, we see these dramatically increase in terms of the percent agreeing across the magical thinking scale. And once again, these are nearly doubling in their percentages who are agreeing this, and in a pretty linear fashion here. We were pretty struck by these results. Similarly, people reporting supernatural experiences also change across this symbolic thinking scale. People say they have felt the presence from God or received a sign from God, or they actually changed something by praying. The percent saying these things happen to them also tend to double across this particular scale. Once again, our fundamentalist religiosity items, these are at least 4 of them, they too tend to increase. Our symbolic thinkers tend to be much more likely to subscribe to fundamentalist religious beliefs. Other beliefs, we asked some questions about crystals, homeopathy, ghosts. Did humans coexist with dinosaurs? These two, in a slightly less linear pattern, but still nevertheless increase across the symbolic thinking scale. The percent who believe in Darwin's theory of evolution decreases pretty steadily across the symbolic scale. What we're really trying to understand here is why people would subscribe to transgressive beliefs. And particularly, why might they reject the scientific consensus that comes from what elites are telling them. And we suggest that probably it's because a lot of those beliefs that are being told to them don't have a lot of emotional resonance for them. They don't necessarily have a lot of utility for them. Whereas magical beliefs have a utility, and their utility is about emotional management. And it's about making sense of the anxiety and apprehension and rationalizing the apprehension and anxiety they feel in a very uncertain world. We talk about why or whether conspiracy theories now are beginning to flourish. And one has to wonder if it's an ironic byproduct of sort of democratization of knowledge is that we now have a crisis of authority. All of this sort of democratic questioning, which in fact is an integral part of the scientific experience, is sort of the questioning of orthodoxy, the relentless questioning of any kind of truth. There generates a lot of uncertainty, and science is really about sort of sitting with uncertainty. And as that has spread, and as that has become in some sense democratized, that has also generated, we might say, a crisis of authority. And in that crisis of authority, where you see these sort of transgressive narratives can take root. And the reason why they may flower and prosper is for people who are trying to understand an uncertain world, for whom conditional probabilities make little intuitive sense and probably just don't resonate at all. It's going to be very hard to sort of talk to someone who doesn't really get conditional probabilities about sort of scientific outcomes in some ways. And then if you contrast that with some sort of supernatural explanation or a conspiracy narrative, wow, that has a lot more emotional resonance. And so one of the things that I think is interesting about this is trying to understand where and the power and the dynamic of these transgressive narratives and how they exist as, in some ways, as a byproduct of a more open dialogue about questioning scientific, religious, or medical or sort of expert opinions.